Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
Hi, I'm Susan, and I'm a college counselor and have read applications for a small liberal arts college and 2 research universities. My twins are recent college graduates.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of 2 daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at the Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. Good afternoon, friends. Today's episode is going to be a little different than normal. You know, I've been going back and forth in my mind between 2 really important axioms. On the one hand, when you talk about politics, you divide, and we want a united community. People don't come on to Your College-Bound Kid to hear about politics. There are plenty of political shows they can turn to for that. On the other hand, Your College-Bound Kid doesn't duck issues either, and it speaks to the most consequential issues that impact colleges. So how can you avoid talking about an election that may impact life in America in incontrovertible ways, and it can also impact the college experience? So after a lot of deliberation and thought, I have decided that the election is too important for me not to address it, and I am going to share a few thoughts. Next, we'll have a segment I'm going to do about a trend that is emerging with the counselor letters in the applications. One of the best sessions I ever attended at NACAC this year was a session on the counselor letter and how it's under scrutiny and how some colleges are changing their view of the counselor letter. So I'll be sharing kind of the debate on this perspective and let you know some trends and let you know why some colleges are moving away from the college counselor letter being a requirement in the application. Finally, David Hawkins is back, and we're shifting our attention from the NACAC survey on factors in college admissions to look at what did they learn from the first survey they ever did that they commissioned with the Harris Polling Company to look at 1,000 high school students and what they learned about what high school students think about the college admission process and just college in general. But before we jump into our content for the day, I want to share some exciting updates about our college counselor group. So our application just went live for our college counselor group. When I say live, I mean it's up on yourcollegeboundkid.com under the resources tab. And more than 20 of you already have applied just in the last 4 days. Very exciting. I met with Michelle Supernego, who is from the great state of Washington this week. The 2 of us are co-leading the group. She's a regular podcast listener. And we made a couple of decisions. So as part of the rollout for version 2.0, we both agreed the name College Counselor Confab, just too clunky. You know, it's kind of troubling me. It's like College Counselors Confab, 7 syllables. So I think we can do better. So Michelle had a great idea. She's like, you know, in this application, we actually asked people in the application, like, why you want to be a part of the group. And Michelle noticed that a lot of counselors, when they're applying, they're commenting on how they want to connect with other counselors all across the country. So she suggested we call it Counselors Connect, or we could go Counselors Connect Group, CCG. And I liked it. So that's what we're going to go with. So 2.0 has a brand new name, Counselors Connect. And we also want you to know that we're going to implement something called priority application. That sounds like college, right? What do you expect from a couple of admissions people? So up until December 12th, or a month from now, we will prioritize anyone who applies. Doesn't mean they're going to be admitted. It's just like college. But your chances are going to be higher of being admitted into our group if you submit an application by December 10th. So here's my request to our listeners. If you know of a college counselor who you feel would enjoy having their counseling skills improved by being part of a supportive and empathetic community, please recommend they apply to be part of our monthly 1-hour Zoom meeting. Let them know they can just go to your collegebrounkid.com, click the resource tab. They'll see the application. It's the last option under the resource tab. Now, we're looking for all types of college counselors, and so far, all types are applying. We want public school counselors. We want independent or private school counselors. We want community-based organization counselors and IECs. All types are welcome, domestic and international. Go ahead and apply and spread the word. All right, I mentioned I'm going to say a few things about the election. First thing I want to say, and this is why I deliberated so long about this. You know, you always hear two things you don't want to talk about, right? Politics and religion. Right? There's a reason why that came into play. I don't want to be divisive. I don't want to offend anyone who has a different perspective, and I don't want to divide our precious community. You know, I have clients who I like a lot who I know voted for Trump, so I don't mean to offend. I also don't plan on having soliloquies like this episode again. We'll talk about topics in terms of how the new administration is going to address things like student loans and diversity, equity, and inclusion, and endowments toward colleges, and just a bunch of different policy things that I anticipate will come to fruition, and we'll address them as they come up, and we'll have intelligent conversations about what implications are out there for, let's say, for example, international applicants decrease, which happened in his last stint in the presidency. How's that going to impact colleges' budgets? And if they're positive things, we'll address those as well. But it'll be in the context of how it's impacting college admissions and college admissions experience. So don't expect for me to repeat a monologue again like you're going to hear today. But I do feel the need to say something on one of the biggest events in American history when it happened this week. Now, friends, one of the things you learn when you become a college counselor is that you often have to put on another type of counselor hat. That's why, like for my company, School Match for You, Lisa was the first person I hired, partly because she's awesome, but also I knew that she was bringing the skills of a psychologist, and I knew how useful that was going to be. A lot of times you have to be a comforter, an empathizer. You have to be someone who listens and tries to encourage through understanding. And over the years, I've had people just share some of the most difficult things with me, you know, in the counseling room. You know, I can't even share all of them with you, but I'm thinking of a mom letting me know that she found out her husband is cheating. I'm thinking of another mom who let me know that her husband was beating on her and how she was going to have to go into custody. It was terrible. I've had kids over the years despair about losing a friend to suicide, or losing a friend to a school shooting, or being traumatized by a school shooting. I mean, all these things happen, and people just need a listening ear. They need some empathy. They need some support. Well, the last few days have really felt like that for me in the counseling room. I had one family from California I'm working with who had applied ED to Duke, and they reached out to me to talk to me about whether they needed to pull their ED because they're just not sure if they can see themselves living in a state that voted for Trump. I had a mom from New York schedule a meeting with me to discuss adding international schools to the list so that they could go overseas in Scotland and London. I had a mom and her son in Texas let me know that their son would be going to London for the last 2 years of high school, and they would kind of see which direction this country is going. That's just in the last few days. Storage units ran a survey on November 6th to determine how many Harris voters said they would relocate. And they surveyed a large number of people. It was like 1,800 and some. And do you know 44% said they would like to move? but probably won't. 5% said they would definitely move, and another 5% said that they will probably move. Those who said they would like to move but probably won't said personal finances, family, community ties are the reasons they're going to stay in place. But the 10% planning to move or seriously considering it, 90% said they're looking at moving to another country, with the top choices being Canada, the UK, and Mexico. And California, New York, and Colorado were the top 3 choices for those considering moving to another state. So I just read that just to say that this election really hit a lot of people really hard. And I would be dishonest if I didn't admit that Tuesday was a rough night for me. And overall, it's been a pretty hard week emotionally. And I have concerns. I have concerns that America's heading toward authoritarianism. And how can I not when the new president has repeatedly lauded Viktor Orban of Hungary, Putin, Kim, and other sluggish dictators? How can I not when so many of the national defense leaders around him in the first administration, like Milley and Mathis and Kelly and Bolton, Tillerson and Pence and so many others, warned us of how dangerous it would be if he returned to office? I have concerns when he talked about weaponizing the U.S. military to target political rivals like Adam Schiff, Nancy Pelosi, and Liz Cheney. And I am concerned that America may go in a very dark direction of authoritarianism and violence and using, dividing what used to be separate powers. You know, Congress used to be separate. The courts used to be separate. The president, equal branches of government. But now you're talking about the Department of Justice and the military. So I have concerns about that. You know, I have concerns. What does it say about a society's lack of respect for women when the guy who said, and I quote, "If you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything. Grab them in the P word." And then when he had to appear in a New York court and he sat for a deposition for a Jean Carroll case that a unanimous jury, by the way, ruled against him, and a judge said he functionally raped someone. In the deposition, when Eugene Carroll's lawyer, Roberta Kaplan, asked, "Is it true with stars that they can grab women by the privates?" And he said, and I quote verbatim, "Well, that's what, if you look over the last million years, I guess that's been largely true. Not always, but largely. Unfortunately or fortunately." The guy said fortunately. Really? Are you serious? Did you say that? So I think of what it would have meant to so many young women, especially young brown and black women, having Kamala as the first woman president after 46 consecutive males being president for 46 elections. And I think about what Susan B. Anthony went through in the 1870s. And then it took almost 60 years after that before women's suffrage. And I worry about the growth of misogyny. I worry about the growth of cruelty toward immigrants. I mean, kids were thrown in cages in the first presidency. What's going to happen in the second one? I worry about corporate influences. I worry about the role of NATO and Russian expansion and gutting of everything to do with racial equality. I worry about people losing their health care and banning books and the rise of bullying and lying and what I would call toxic masculinity, never admitting you're wrong and thinking that's being tough. I worry about an acceleration on the war on college, and how are college finances going to be impacted if less international students come, or if certain students choose not to go to college in certain places. So I worry about a lot of these things. And so if you're feeling these concerns, I want you to know I do feel your pain. I share that with you. But believe it or not, I'm actually doing a lot better than I thought I would be doing. And I want to share a few things that are helping me to cope. So if you're dispirited, I hope they will inspire you. The first, and I have to shout out a colleague of mine who's, I work with some people that aren't on the podcast. And this is one who's not on here, and I don't want to mention her name because I never asked for her permission. But I felt like she was handling this quite well. And I asked her, how do you handle things well? Should I just unplug? Just unplug. You have to unplug for your own mental health. And she's so right. So if you're following the election closely and listening to the commentary, just unplug. Time heals all wounds. It will do wonders for your soul. I mean, I've been completely detached and unplugged, with the exception of listening to a couple of obituaries about what happened. But I've really been detached, and I can see it. The healing process is already starting. So my first advice to you is unplug, detach, get away, throw yourself into whatever else you like to do, going for walks, reading books, hanging out with friends, family. And the second thing that's really helped me, and I'm hoping this can help you and put you in a place where I'm doing so much better than I expected, is I have consciously adopted the glass is half full attitude. I said to myself, am I going to focus on the glass half empty or the glass half full? So what does that practically mean? It means I made a list of all the amazing things in my life that this election can't change. And the list just kept getting longer and longer and longer. And as it got longer and longer and longer, I felt my spirits being lifted. And even by Wednesday, I was already like, wow, I can't believe I'm not going to say that I was feeling great. And I'm not going to say I didn't have my moments. And I still have my moments. But I was in a much better mental state than I ever thought I would be. So let me get practical. What are some of those things? Well, I'm going to share with you what they were for me. And I want to encourage you to make your own list. I still have a loving family, amazing, not only my own nuclear family, but my brother and my sister and my parents and my extended family. I have incredible friends. I have my relationship with God. I have my eyes and I can see the beauty in the world God has created. I can enjoy nature. I have an amazing job. I mean, I get to help young people chase their dreams by helping them with their college process. And I love every day. It's so much fun. I have my health. I could be in pain somewhere, and I have my health. And I have this podcast, which is a big part of my life, where I get to meet with thousands of you every week in our listening family. I can still do the things I enjoy, like watching a basketball or football game, or enjoying gospel music and R&B music. I can read a great book. I can enjoy the garden and the yard that we have in the back. Nietzsche and I were just talking about all the roses that are popping right now. The yellow ones and the peach ones and the orange ones. And I can live my life to the fullest. And no election can take that away from me. And who knows? Maybe the bark was bigger than the bite. Maybe our democracy, which I love, will survive. Maybe things won't be as bad. Maybe even some good things will come about as a result of this. Maybe it's not all doom and gloom. So if you're hurting, I encourage you first to unplug, and second, make a list of all the great things in your life that this election cannot take from you. And if you're still in pain, know that there are others who also feel punched in the gut. And if you voted for Trump and you see the world different than I do, I just ask you for the grace to let me share this with so many people who are fearful of where America is going. And, you don't need to write an angry letter or go off, even if you disagree. Just give me the freedom to say this one time, because I believe there are a lot of people that really needed some encouragement. Friends, if you feel sucker punched in the gut by the election and you found what I said encouraged you, inspired you, uplifted you a little bit, please share this with your friends, family, coworkers, and in your social media feed. All right, enough of the heavy stuff. Let's get back to why you listen to Your College Bound Kid. And that's the content. So I want to talk to you about the counselor letter. A big debate is emerging, and it's a pretty compelling when you listen to some of the arguments. So, I grew up in an environment where holistic admissions, I believe in it to the core, and I believe in all aspects of whole person admissions. The more comprehensive, the better. Multiple letters of recommendations, interviews, teacher recs, outside recs, all of it's all good. Looking at people in very comprehensive and complex ways to see what they'll contribute, what they'll add, and to understand if they've had bumps along the road, and give them grace. But this session was smartly done. So what they did was they had two different college admission leaders. They had Ashley Pally, who's over the office at Caltech, and they had Gary Clark, VP of Enrollment at UCLA. And then they also had 2 high school counselors, and they're very intentional and smart. They picked 2 different type of schools. So one school is Granada Hills. It's a large charter school in LA with 1,140 students in the senior class. 1,140 for 4 college counselors. So you do the ratio, that's, close to 300 people on each person's caseload. And then they had a private school counselor from a school called Oaks Christian. And that's in the Westlake Village in LA County. And this school is literally like a block inside LA County. But they have 8 college counselors, and there's an average caseload of 38. And so they're just talking about the differences in the amount of exposure that students get to the counselor. And they're challenging the concept of, is it equitable to have a system where some people get so much access to counselors, which inevitably produces a very, very rich letter, and other people don't even have a chance of that. So many times when I want to talk with Julia or want to record a podcast with Julia, she's like, Mark, I got to get my letters done. I got to get my letters done. And she spends hours on each letter because she can do that because she has a small caseload. Our longtime listeners may remember, I'm taking you back. I was really excited to have one of my former students on the podcast, Tara Kalinison. She was at Smith College in the admission office, and she did an interview for us where she walked us through the seasons of admissions. What do admission officers do in the fall? What do they do in the winter? What do they do in the spring? What do they do in the summer? You might want to go back and listen to that. Well, I was at Loyola Marymount for the NACAC conference, and I was on one of the official counselor tours of LMU. And all of a sudden, I hear, Mark! I turn around, and there's Tara. Now, just within the last week, she'd been on my mind, like, Tara, we haven't talked in a while. So Tara's accepted a college counseling role at Rod Country Day, a private school in, the Westchester, New York area. So do you know she has 18 students on her caseload? Now, she's going to get more next year, but she has 18 students on her caseload. Imagine how well she gets to know the students. I remember a conversation that I had when I was at Westtown, and I was interacting with an admission officer from Haverford College. And the admission officer was saying, we love your kids. We love your kids. And she was particularly talking about underrepresented students of color. And she said, Mark, we could go to the Bronx. We could go to Harlem. We can grab the valedictorian from the class. But one, we don't know how rigorous their curriculum is. We don't know if they can live away from home. We don't know if they can live in a predominantly white environment. We don't know if they can live in a predominantly wealthy environment. And then she said, and you know your kids so well because they're living with you. So there's a richness in the recommendations. And as a result of that, we know what we're getting. Now, of course, I was at the school, so I loved that. It was like music to my ears. But what this session is doing is it's challenging the equity of that. Is that really fair? Is that really fair? And now Ashley Pally, she's young. She's only in the mid-30s, but she's become a real leader in the national stage when it comes to college admissions because she's a thinker. And Ashley shared this story. She said, I grew up Riverside, California, 900 in my graduating class. And at the last second, when she was applying to scripts, she realized there's a requirement for a counselor letter. And she's like, I don't even know who my counselor is. How am I going to get a letter from them? So she went over to the counseling office, found out who her counselor was. Remember, there's 900 in the class. And told the counselor she needs to have this letter. And the counselor fortunately did it. But she's now taken the position, and she said that's greatly informed her thinking. Is that really fair? Is it really fair that we have a system like that? And so she shared her view, and she shared why Caltech's no longer requiring the counselor letter anymore. Teacher letter, extremely important. Counselor letter, no longer required. A shift. Then Gary Clark, he shared his perspective. So, we've had Gary on the podcast before, but Gary grew up in Virginia, worked briefly in admissions at William and Mary, always had the counselor letter. Went to USC, the counselor letter in admissions there for a good amount of time. Went to Pitzer, counselor letter. Now he's at UCLA, no counselor letter. So he talked about doing admissions in both places. And he made the case for the self-advocacy for the student. And he shared a couple of reasons why UCLA has gone in that direction. And so I'll just share a couple things with you that, that Gary said. So he said, listen, we had 146,275,000 applications. He said, we're up almost 40,000 from the pandemic. All right. We're going to accept 9%. He said, we're going to have 1,962 appeals that we have to process. Here's a big number for you. UCLA had 1,962 appeal decisions. By the way, they only reversed 5. And he said, on top of that, every application's read twice. So he went on to say, do the math on that. 150,000 apps times 2, because you got to read them twice. So basically 300,000 reads. And how much time you spend on each read. And so what he said was, it is both a practical issue. That amount of time just is really hard to justify. I mean, they already have 260 seasonal readers. But he also said there's a philosophical objection. He said, how can we expect a student to have a close relationship with a counselor when, let's just take California, he said we're even worse than the national average for the ratio of counselors to students. And both Ashley and Gary said the way they were trained in the past, because remember, Ashley worked at Scripps in admissions and Pomona in admissions, and then even at first at Caltech, they had counselor letters, right? So she's coming from the place where the counselor letter is really important. And same for Gary. And he said the way they were trained and the way I was trained as well, which is, take into consideration if it's a bigger school and don't expect the counselor to know the student. But if you're at a smaller school, you can expect them to know the student. But they both are challenging. Is that really enough of a correction to create a level playing field? Is it really doing that? Ashley shared their system, 13,000 apps. By the way, 2.5% acceptance rate. How crazy is that? They have 6 stages. They start out with their staff review of everything. Staff will review the top 10 to 15% of the applicants. Then they'll hand them to the faculty. Then they have 26 full PhD faculty that review every application and decide which ones they are interested in teaching. And then it goes back to the staff for another review. Then they sit in a room and go over every kid to only admit 356 kids for the whole world. And so she talked about the inequities of having a counselor letter. She quoted from some recent quotes from Roz Chetty, the Harvard economist that writes on the economics of inequality, and how Chetty talked about how private schools give kids the polish because they know how to write letters. And once again, the question is, are we contributing to inequity? Now, this is a little bit off topic, but I thought you might be interested in it. Pally said, if you have to write letters, we love bullet points. Bullet points. You know what we want to know? You're an extraordinary STEM talent. That's what we want. We're looking for you're an extraordinary STEM talent that we rarely see. Bullet point 1. You love physics and you're on the edge of your seat. You can't get enough of it. Bullet point 2. She talked about a trend in Chicago, which she absolutely loves, where Chicago counselors are literally doing 3 bullet points. Bullet point 1, this is the size of my caseload. Bullet point 2, something about if someone's an exceptional STEM talent. Another point, and then that's how they're getting through the caseload. And that's her advice, by the way. If you're in a situation where schools are still requiring it and you've got a big, large caseload, go to bullet points, short and sweet. Stop doing this half-page, 3/4 page where you go on and on about yourself and your credentials and why you know a kid who's a good kid because you went to Harvard and you did this. Stop, enough. Nobody cares about that. She said we just skip over that. We don't even read it. And they also brought out the other side. There can be value in the counsel letter. They're not saying there's not. No, they said that when you rely on more self-advocacy, which the UC system does, it can be difficult for a first-gen kid who's not comfortable bragging about themselves. There can be value having the perspective of somebody outside of yourself speaking for you. And colleges are like to know what kind of a community member are you. And, there's certain things that you can say in a counsel letter that you might not put in the profile. That's very customized, right? Now, we could have talked about this on the podcast. We picked another article. Julie and I had a conversation, Texas and some other schools, about the counsel letter and schools moving away from it a while ago. But one of the articles we could have gone with was one that came out from NYU. And they discussed this a lot in the session. And the article was called Recommendation FAQ. Is one letter really enough for NYU? And so this is an article that came out by the Associate Director of Admissions, Ms. Harms, at NYU. And I want to just read a little bit of it for you because you'll get a sense of it. So it says, NYU's new recommendation policy aims to reduce barriers and increase flexibility for applicants while still allowing multiple letters to be submitted. And then it says, NYU requires one letter of recommendation from a teacher, counselor, coach, supervisor, or anyone else in a position of authority. NYU, is one letter really enough? Yes, by Risa Harms. Goes on to say, every admission season, we get questions from students eager to understand how this impacts their admission process. As you'll see, it doesn't change much. Then she says, why the change? In 2 words, reducing barriers. NYU receives applications from all over the world. School systems and their resources vary greatly. Not all students can easily obtain a recommendation from both a teacher and a counselor. And for some students, the teachers and counselors that they have access to might not be the people who can best speak to their readiness for college. By reducing our requirement to one letter and expanding who could write that letter, we hope to ease this pressure point for applicants. I think Gary's being really transparent when he says, listen, it's overwhelming for us with the numbers. So it's both us, the practicality side, but it's the philosophical side of the equity. And I'm going to share some stats with you to show you that this is absolutely a growing trend. So this is research from the Common App. So 385 of the Common App members required the counselor rec in 2015. That number's down to 299. 299. So you've, in effect, lost 25% of the schools no longer require that in an 8-year period. Now, here's some more interesting data. If you look at the acceptance rates of the colleges, you'll see the lower the acceptance rate, the more people required. And that makes sense, right? When you're not just admitting by the numbers and you're making difficult decisions, like the more information you have, the more it helps you. So that's totally understandable. But across all selectivity groups, the percentage of people requiring the counselor letter has gone down. So let's start with colleges that admit 75% or more kids. Well, in 2015, 54% were requiring the letter. Now only 18%. In 8 years, you went from 54% to 18%. Let's look at the group between 50 to 75% acceptance rate. 65% were requiring it. Now it's down to 38%. Okay, let's go to the group admitting between 25 and 50%. That went from 80% to 56%. And then let's look at the most selective group. Even that most selective group, people admitting under 1 in 4 apps, that number was in the low 80s in 2015, and now it's down 73%. So that's down about 10%. So across all levels of selectivity. And one of the counselors, high school counselors, she actually referred to the state of college admissions report that David Hawkins has been talking about here at NACAC. She pulled up the report and she looked at the 6 top factors that determine who gets in. And if you listen to the interview with David, you know what they are, right? So you look at the first one and you see grades and academic courses, you see overall grades, you see rigor, you see personal qualities, right? And the essay, all 5 of those are ahead of undemonstrated interest as well. I'm sorry. And then you get to the counselor letter. And she made a point. Do you notice the difference between the counselor letter and all these other things above it? I hadn't thought about this before. Every one of those other things involve you advocating for yourself. Like you advocate for yourself by the grades you get. You advocate for yourself by the rigor you take. You advocate for yourself whether you have engagement and demonstrated interest. And you advocate by yourself by the personal qualities you demonstrate. And she said, so why are we taking it and doing something where we advocate for you? Now, you take that to an extreme and you say, well, why have teacher recommendations? And some people are in that camp. Ashley made a very compelling case for the value of teacher recommendations over counselor recommendations. The idea being you see your teacher every single day. But what about a kid that hasn't even known their counselor at all? And now the counselor has to write a letter on their behalf. And another thing that really hit home was they described the process a little more detail at Granada Hills. Once again, this is this local charter school with 1,140 seniors, 4 counselors. All right. And they said, like, we're a school that we're going to do a counselor for anybody. So, yeah, they said that 2.8 GPA kid that came in and wanted to apply to a school with under a 5% admit rate, we wrote for them because we just don't believe from an equity standpoint that we should check the boxes in the secondary school report for some and do letters for others. We don't roll that way. And they said, yeah, the kid that rolled in on November 1st and wanted a letter for November 1, we did that. That's just what we do. That's part of what we believe is equity. We might not have been smiling when we did it, but we did it. So they said, now, but look at the reality of what we're dealing with. They said, we literally created a system where we have 33 sections of this one class, and we had them rotate into the college counseling office, 33 sections, so we could just do a quick overview. So at least we could say we spoke to everybody in the class one time in the school, the 1,140 in the senior class. They said we do 20 application workshops a year, and 20 to 50 people show up, but we don't reach every single kid. And then they said, but there's other kids that volunteer in our office. There's other kids that seek us out. There's other kids that know us well. The letter that kid is getting is so completely different from the person who we never have a one-on-one with ever. And is it really fair? So I just want you to be aware, friends, that there is a trend going on. There's a lot of buzz going on to take a real close look at requiring the counselor letter. I'm going to be sharing some changes going on with teacher recommendations as well. But I wanted to get to you here with the counselor letter. So hopefully you enjoyed that.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, David Hawkins sent me links for both the factors involved in college admissions as well as what we're going to talk about in parts 3, 4, and 5, which is their survey of high school students. They're in the show notes, and I strongly encourage you to read them. I think you'll get a lot more out of the content if you look at the actual survey results. But in part 3, David talks about the first ever survey NACAC has ever authorized for high school students and about their experience in college admissions. David shares some of the main takeaways from the student survey when it comes to things like diversity and the value of college. David talks about a half dozen of the questions that they asked to students in the survey. David talks about whether they will do the survey again. David talks about who provided the funding for the survey. David talks about some of the key findings in the survey. And David talks about one surprising finding that emerged that they were not expecting. Listen and enjoy. I'm back with David Hawkins. Hi, Dave.
Hello. How are you doing, Mark?
Good, good. Special thanks to Dave because you'll hear this all consecutively, but this is actually a second recording. And I'm thrilled about what he's going to do. He's going to talk about the high school survey and the methodology and the key gleanings from that survey, and then we'll talk a little bit about how the perception of what high school students thinks is different from what the admission folks say. So start out and take it where you want to go, Dave.
All right. Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to be back. So this survey that we're going to talk about today was actually a first of its kind for NACAC, at least, where we worked with the Harris Poll, as one of those well-known national survey firms.
And they focus on youth. They focus on youth a lot in their
Yes,
research, Harris. Yeah,
that's right. That's right. So we worked with them to develop a survey, which we administered to 1,000 students nationally. And when I say students, I mean young people who are either juniors or seniors in high school or first year students in college. So we had a very specific set of students we wanted to look at. The purpose for the survey was twofold. The first was in some of our work with foundations and advocacy groups to help improve equity and access in college admission. Listening to what the students say was a central recommendation that came out of some of our reports. And so we felt it was very important, particularly at the moment when we did this survey, which was right as the Supreme Court was considering the case involving Harvard and UNC and race-conscious admissions, that we check in, that we see what are students' perspectives. We're reading a lot of news about what people think in this country about admissions and about some of these issues. But what do the students think? So that was one really important reason that we did this survey. And then the second reason was it was an opportunity for us as an association to just gain some better understanding of what we talk about a lot, factors in the admissions decision, application processes, things like that we get an opportunity to hear from the students on these very practical matters. So it was really a great opportunity, and one that we are very happy we took because it gave us some really insightful results.
And so was the methodology just send a survey out? Like, how did you decide, or did Harris do all that for you?
Harris did all of that for us. We definitely, first of all, we gave them those age criteria
Sure.
to filter in. We definitely wanted it to be nationally representative. So they do their survey magic and get us the kinds of students we need, both geographically, demographically. We did oversample, really not necessarily oversample, more just sort of correct or make sure that we focus on the demographics of the student population writ large. So that obviously if we were looking only at first year college students, we might get a slightly different demographic profile. So we wanted the profile to reflect nationally what our demographics are. And then other than that, Harris conducted the poll over a couple of weeks in the summer of 2023. And we were able to get the results back and get them to us even before the Supreme Court made its decision, which was kind of interesting because one of the main findings of the report was that 3/4 of students that we surveyed said that diversity was critical, was essential to their higher education experience. Either it was currently or would be. So it's an interesting sort of disconnect because you look at nationally, you look at adults that have been surveyed on issues like that, and the numbers aren't as clearly on one side or the other. But for our students, clearly diversity is something they're thinking a lot about and something they think they would benefit from. So fascinating time to get the study. And like I said a minute ago, we wanted to sort of delve into some of the things we talk about all the time to see if students saw things the same way. So that's really that was our starting point. There again, I'll emphasize and underscore listening to students. I mean, as I see it, Mark, educational institutions would not exist without students. I mean, that's it's not just as I see it. That's a fact. And so when you run an organization and you're not centering your most important constituents, you might have a problem. I mean, you might be able to keep things going for a while, but it is very critical that we keep our ear pretty close to the ground for these students, and what they think matters a lot to us as professionals. So this is something that we were, like I said, happy to invest in. I think interesting to note too. We asked the students right up front, did they feel that higher education was worth the cost, right? We hear a lot about cost and affordability. And I think, you and I could have a whole other podcast on federal and state policy with respect to affordability and whether it's the right thing or not. Short answer, no, it's not. College could be significantly more affordable if we put more public investment in it.
Yep.
But these students, 65% of them said, yes, college is worth it. Whereas you look in the public and you see in the general population somewhere on the order of 35% say college is worth the cost. And I think, a couple things to me that came out of that main finding were, students are probably closer to the ground, first of all, so they know, so they understand like where they're headed, what they might want to, what kind of college they might want to enroll in. The other thing, though, is that they're the ones who stand to gain from it, and the adults. I always say that it's like the adults are trying to pull up the ladder behind them, right? It's like
a good analogy.
Maybe public opinion shouldn't be driving our policy towards students' futures, right? There's some very, very important people, aka students,
who
who
deserve a
really
seat at
want
the
this,
table and need to
right?
have their voice heard. Yeah,
Exactly, and who want this, and who, even despite bad policy in the United States, are willing to pay for something that they care very dearly about and that they really feel is important to them. So, again, just to set the table, this is why it's important to understand what the students are up to and what they're thinking.
I was glad you said you just did this 2023 because I learned fairly recently about this survey, and I was really excited. And then I was like, how do I not know about this? so it's pretty recent. So why don't you talk about the questions that you asked?
Yeah, well, we went through a whole range of categories. Here at NACAC, we have so many things we'd love to know about, but the first thing we wanted to do was get a sense of sort of where students might be headed, like what their own personal journeys and aspirations were. Just again, see how college figures into their thinking. The corresponding sort of popular narrative being college isn't really necessary, and I'm not going to dispute that, but that's a very, very broad statement, and there's a lot of nuance in there. So that was the first thing. We also wanted to know what they thought of the application process itself. What is it? Is it, does it stress you out? Is it, something that could be, how would you improve it? All the, and here we're talking about really the mechanics of applying, so the whole process from start, like searching and like maybe who gives you advice and where you're, what more you could benefit from in terms of help on certain parts of the application. We then go through and ask the students about the supports that they got, whether it was from their family, friends, counselors, teachers, etc. Then we asked them about some of the things that they experienced individually, so wherever they were in the process, some of the things that might either encourage or discourage them from applying in general or to a specific institution. Interactions with the admissions office. I think you just hear in all the topics I'm talking about, we want to know so much. And then maybe most importantly, or it's all important, but how they viewed the admissions process itself. So aside from the application, where is their sort of sense of how colleges choose students, how students are selected, if it's a selective admissions process, even down to the point of asking them if, to estimate what the average acceptance rate is in the United
Mm,
States. And the good news is they were pretty close,
hmm.
closer than I would have thought, given the popular perception that selectivity, that colleges are all like the Ivy League somehow. But yeah, so that we really tried to go start to finish and just get their sense of what it was like to go through all of this.
Do you see yourself doing this again, and sort of what timeline? Every 3 years, 5 years, 2 years? What are you thinking? Maybe you haven't made up your mind yet, but
Yeah.
this is very valuable information. I doesn't sound like it would be a one and done.
No, certainly not. And this particular survey was made possible through a grant from the Lumina Foundation. So that was we would very much love to do this, and again and in perpetuity,
Sure.
because times change,
Yeah.
student attitudes change, and particularly, I think we talked about this last time, Mark. We're thinking about a new forward-looking center here at NACAC to really think about what the future of admissions looks like. In
Yeah.
order to do that, we do need a very constant sort of flow of input from students. So I could see us doing this on a fairly regular basis.
I mean, that's really important data, and it just sort of shows sort of how NACAC's really in the trenches, you know, t- trying to fight upstream sometimes against the culture and everything coming at the attack on college, but trying to do it with data and not just a willy-nilly arbitrary opinion. So why don't you get into some of the key findings?
Yeah, well, I think in the last conversation we had, I'm gonna start sort of towards the back end of this thing. We talked about the factors in the admission decision. What colleges really consider to be important or not important when they make admissions decisions, and there were some interesting findings. If you look at it overall, students were pretty close. They felt that grades were the most important factor, and not we asked them what they thought what the factors actually were, and then we also asked them a follow up question: what do you think they should be? What do you think the order should be? And
Wow.
so, interestingly, grades came in at the top of both lists. So that's good. I mean, we always
Yeah.
tell students that what you do in 4 years of
Sure.
school or more is more important than what you do on a Saturday or what you write in an essay. The areas where they really sort of, I think, overestimated importance
Hmm.
was admission test scores.
Sure.
That was they had that second behind grades, and 5 years ago they would have been right. At this point, significantly less important. And one of the reasons why I want to emphasize that right up front is that um, I have two children. They're not children anymore, but both of them have gone through the college application process. And when they were in high school, each one had a different college night experience, but both involved overvaluing the test scores. The one that I'll mention is that the high school where my son went lined up about 12 seniors across the front of the back to school or the welcome to high school sort of orientation. And the question that they posed to these 12 young people was, what is something you would have done differently as a freshman, knowing what you know now as a senior? And 9 of the 12 of them, I'm not kid you not, 9 of the 12 said they would have practiced more for the SAT. And I thought, oh, I was sitting in the back of the room, and it was just everything I could do not to stand
Yeah.
up and say, well, actually, so that's, I think it will be important for students to absorb the message that it really, you're really right. Your gut instinct is right. Your grades are more important than anything else.
I want to stop you on this point,
Yeah,
David, because it's
yeah.
extremely important because I see this literally all the time as a counselor. Thinking of a conversation I literally had last week with a family from California, and mom shared me a little bit of information about the students' grades, and then went on and on and on about their plan for test prep. And this is a young student here. This is somebody, starting 10th, just in the start of 10th grade. And it was on and on and on. It was extremely comprehensive. And then asked me literally just off grades and testing, what schools are going to be good for the student. Like, not only did I not know all kinds of other information, but the clear implication is once you have test scores, then that's all that somebody really needs to know, or they know the most important things. And I also see it when it comes to how much time, how much money people allocate for formal prep. And I certainly see it when it comes to the most disillusioned people I find in this process are kids with high test scores. And then they don't get in certain schools, and students and parents can't understand, especially when their test scores were higher than their peers who sometimes get in. So, on so many levels, I experience this. And I think, you know, people want to know the truth. And so, if we can, correct some misperceptions on the values of certain things, I think we're doing a service to everybody.
Absolutely. And this ties to another finding that we had in this survey, and that is more than half of the young people that we surveyed said that they felt like just a number going through the admissions process.
Mm,
And that actually ties into a couple of things. The first of which is that our admissions officers, if you spend time with them, and I know you have, Mark, they always seem to want to get to know more about a student, right? I don't think I've ever heard an admission officer say, "I want to know less about this student."
hmm
I mean,
Sure.
maybe there's a reason, but no, I have never heard an admission officer say, "I want to know less about my students."
Were you able to unpack that at all as to why they felt that way?
The admissions officers or
No, 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 no.
the
Yeah,
students.
why the students felt like a number.
Yeah, that was really, that we didn't get to unpack that much more. No, it was
Mm-hmm.
mainly just sort of a perception that we wanted to see to test out.
That would be interesting to have more
Yeah,
information on that. Like even for me, I'm like super curious because there could be a number of reasons why they may say that. I'm not sure exactly what would be their top reasons when I think of, I mean, I'm not shocked by it, but I don't know exactly what's driving that.
yeah, no, and it would be definitely ripe for further study because you do have the idea, like for instance, you just
Hmm
start out big. The college application marketplace, let's say, or landscape, or whatever we want to call it, is one where that is occupied by a lot of students. It is a mass market at this point. Easy to feel like a number in any circumstance that looks like that. I think then to our point about test scores, people, and this is not to scold anyone. I think we all have this bias in some ways. When you can reduce something to a number, it's so much easier to say, oh, this number is bigger than that other number, or lower if you play golf, which I do not. But the 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 problem is that for a process that is driven by goals and lofty sort of visions of holistic admissions and institutional mission statements that are that want to open the world's eyes to education and provide the keys to tomorrow. The admissions process itself can be very reductive, and it can feel very reductive in that way. And it just, having raised a couple of children on my own, you if you project anything, children or young people are going to pick it up. And so, if the process is reductive, and some of our work recently has suggested that maybe it is too reductive in some important ways, that we're missing a lot of students, I could see where students would reflect that back to us and say, well, look, if all you care about is X, Y, and Z, yet here I am, this unique, one of a kind, budding young intellect, then I'm sure you could feel like, geez, I'm just one of the cattle sort of being moved through the fence on this thing.
Friends, this concludes this segment of my interview with David Hawkins. We hope you join us next week for the next segment. On Thursday's episode, we'll have two questions from a listener. One Susan will take and one Hillary will take. Now, Hillary and I are going to answer a question from Joanna, and she's a mom from the DC area, and she wants to know, do colleges like or dislike certain schools or certain regions or certain school districts? And should this factor into the colleges that students put on their list? What do you do when you look at a school, a college, and you see they haven't accepted anybody or hardly anybody from your school? Should you be factoring that in and not putting them on your list? It's a great question. And Hillary and I dive into it. Next, Susan will join me to answer a question from Mary from Atlanta. And she's got another great question. It has to do with the shortage in college housing and how that can impact the college experience. And Mary wants to know, what tips do we have for students and parents so they can make informed decisions about student housing so they know what they're walking into? And she shares some nightmare stories she's heard from some friends in her network. Then we have 2 brand new interviews for you, and they're both real deep dives. And each one went over an hour, 40 minutes. So we're slicing them into 20-minute segments. They'll both run over 5 weeks. And I did a real deep dive with Gloria and Terry Crawford. Gloria and Terry founded Initial View, the company that launched Glimpse Video that's taking off all over the country. And they're going to be discussing tips for using Glimpse Video in your student's application. And also a bunch of frequently asked questions about Glimpse we get into in that interview. Next, I interview Fabrizio Delozio, and he's the Associate Vice President and the Executive Director of Undergraduate Admissions at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. We'll be doing a real deep dive on UTK, the University of Tennessee, for our spotlight. And friends, remember, winners never quit, and quitters never win. See you on Thursday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stalianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.